Hi everyone. As Lisa said, I'm Brooke Brown and it's a blessing to be here today. When I met Lisa at the Joni and Friends retreat during the summer of 2019, she was intrigued by the fact that I am a writer and speaker, but have a significant speech impairment due to cerebral palsy. Since March is Cerebral Palsy Awareness Month, she was kind enough to invite me to come share my story with you. To start, I'll explain what cerebral palsy actually is. Cerebral palsy, CP for short, is a developmental disability. This means a brain injury has occurred affecting body movement and muscle coordination. It is caused by complications during pregnancy or childbirth. For most children, diagnosis does not occur until a few months after birth. The most severe traits of cerebral palsy are muscle tightness, high tone, which often hampers the ability to be mobile, as well as fine motor capability and impaired speech. Other less common symptoms include loss of hearing, eyesight, and abnormal body sensations and perception. Out of all the developmental disabilities, cerebral palsy is the most commonly diagnosed. It affects approximately 2 out of every 1,000 children born in the United States today. Although very mild cases may improve or disappear with growth and development, cerebral palsy is not curable nor is it progressive. Improvement can be made with therapy, and medications such as baclofen can be used to reduce spasticity. I've personally had a baclofen plump, which is under my skin and my abdomen, since 2003. I call it my hockey puck, because that's what it looks like. The medicine is distributed through a catheter that runs up my spinal cord. The pump gives me a constant infusion of the medication without the annoying side effects of the oral pill. This allows my muscles to relax, so I don't have as many involuntary muscle spasms, especially in my legs. It also allows me to keep my arms down in a more relaxed position rather than up against my chest. Although, my right arm sometimes falls back into my old bad habits, because the right side of my body is more affected by CP. The reduction in spasms has somewhat eased my chronic pain. Some people who have known me since before I got the pump say the baclofen has improved my speech a bit. My voice naturally sounds different because I have dysarthria, a common condition that comes with cerebral palsy, caused by muscle weakness and spasticity. The voice you're hearing right now is an augmentative communication app on my iPad. I am fully able to speak. My speech just takes a little time and practice to understand. When I was in elementary school in the 90s, augmentative communication devices were still pretty awkward, so I didn't have much to do with them until middle school. Before then, I pretty much relied on my parents, after-school caregiver, and classroom aide to help clarify my speech to others. When anyone just missed a word or two, I wrote them down. I was relentless about making myself understood and still am today. It absolutely infuriates me when people try to pretend they understand me when it's totally obvious they're clueless. My dad and I are extremely close, but he's famous for that when he's tired or being grumpy. Anyway, in middle school some of my therapists convinced me to try one of the new Dynavox devices. They thought it would help me have more independence in social settings. I agreed to give it a shot, but it only made things harder for me. I was already being harassed by many of the other students, and having the device turned me into even more of what I call a circus sideshow. Classmates would approach me and simply say, "Make it talk," so I'd type, how are you?" and hit speak. They'd marvel for a moment and then just walk away. Even though most knew I was home with all the lights on because they saw me participating in class and doing all the same assignments, they still didn't see me as a peer. I quickly got tired of being the entertainment and abandoned using the device. Communication devices didn't come up again for me until I was a sophomore at ASU and started having speech therapy at the Speech and Hearing Clinic on campus. It was actually a blessing because it took me almost all of high school to heal from the harassment I endured in middle school and look at assistive technology with a new perspective. See, after 8th grade, my parents knew I needed to be in a more edifying environment, so they applied and I was accepted into the freshman class of 1998 at Scottsdale Christian Academy. Even though leaving public school meant losing all my state-funded therapies during school, I didn't care. Enrolling me in SCA was one of the best decisions my parents ever made for me. I went back to my original communication methods of just writing out the words people missed, etc. My friends were quick studies and my teachers were patient and understanding. During those years, I found my identity in my faith and nurturing my writing dreams. By the time I started speech therapy at ASU, I knew I needed a way to make my voice heard in a crowd. The campus was huge and I had to be able to talk with people independently as a journalism major. Not surprisingly, the clinic director was also an AAC device specialist. She quickly noticed my creative spirit and asked why I wasn't using a device already. I shared my experience with her and she understood my hurt, but encouraged me to try again, promising I'd see a big difference in attitude from middle school. I agreed to try. So, from there on out, Pam helped me find and learn to use a device I was comfortable with, along with my regular speech therapy exercises, administered by her student clinicians. She was right. Having the device really was helpful in noisy places, and I learned how to do things like pre-program interview questions for articles I was writing. The funny thing is though, I still never saw myself becoming a speaker, teaching my own workshops, or acting on stage with a device, like I am now. But Pam did. She introduced me to several device representatives in the ASTAC program, which led to me attending and speaking at several assistive technology conferences. And while all this was going on, I was also doing an independent study with my favorite professor to write, publish, and promote my first book, titled The Little Butterfly Girl, during my senior year. During this time, Dr. Fun, as she is affectionately known by her students, chose to nominate me for the Walter Cronkite Outstanding Undergraduate Award, and in turn, the committee voted to make me student graduation speaker out of the 3 award recipients. Before I even knew any of this, I'd been having a dream about sitting on stage under a spotlight with God saying, if you want people to read your words, they need to hear your story. I want you to speak. I had no idea what it meant, but I found out quickly. Giving that graduation speech was one of the most terrifying, yet healing and humbling experiences of my life. I'm the only student speaker who had ever received a standing ovation to that point. It's just proof that if you trust him, Jesus really will use your greatest weakness for his glory. It's funny because people always ask me, aren't you angry? Or how can you have such strong faith with the amount of struggle you face? The answer is, no, I'm not angry. I have faith because Jesus has always been this protective presence in my life. I knew who he was from the time I was really small, even if I didn't understand the full impact of the cross. When I was 7 or 8, my first full-time assistant explained it to me and led me through the salvation prayer. Although, I will say it wasn't until I faced all of the harassment and struggle in middle school that my faith really became my rock. The last few years with all of my medical trials, he keeps proving the promise of Isaiah 43:2. When I go through deep waters, he is always with me. I used to say that my only bone to pick with him was my speech, but my experience over the last couple of years has made me rethink that. If I didn't have the voice that I have, I would not be here speaking to you today. It's true what he says in John 9 about the blind man. His power can be seen through our weaknesses. Therefore, my speech is my power and part of my ministry to encourage others in their struggles. In the trials I've endured on this journey have taught me one thing. It's that the best way to build relationships, cultivate fulfilling opportunities, and advocate for positive change in our communities is to share our stories with one another. You see, at any given moment, one typically able person will begin communicating with another, under the automatic assumption that the other can comprehend everything being said. However, this is not always true when a typically able person endeavors to engage someone with a disability. Culture has conditioned people to incorrectly assume there is an automatic correlation between one's physical limitations and mental competency. This perception needs to change urgently. As an example, it took me 6 years to win my title because during 2 of my 3 previous pageants as a contestant, my ability to fulfill the stated goal of Miss Wheelchair Arizona was discounted because of my speech impairment. The judges weren't willing to let go of their preconceived notions of the perfectly spoken title holder and really listen to my story or see the value in my background. In fact, after I competed for the first time and lost a tiebreaker, I was told point blank that I wasn't chosen because the judges assumed my speech impairment would hinder me from doing well at nationals. I was deeply offended, and quite frankly appalled at that way of thinking. Just because my voice sounds different from other title holders doesn't mean people won't be encouraged by listening to my story, and my mission won't have a positive impact on the disabled community. This is the reason I titled my platform, Always Assume Competence, Eliminating Stigma and Cultivating Opportunities for People with Disabilities through Personal Storytelling. I don't really know what kinds of stigmas I'll have to contend with at nationals in August, but my goal, even if I don't win the title of Miss Wheelchair America, is to initiate significant and positive changes in people's perceptions of the disability community, even among those who have disabilities themselves. No one should ever avoid communicating with someone else simply because their body mechanics are unfamiliar. A typically able person should strive to approach a person with a disability the same way they would any other. Get to know them by asking questions, seeking out common interests, and listening to their experiences. If cognitive challenges do become apparent, find out what accommodations need to be made. Even many of those with cognitive limitations can sense when someone is being patronizing. As my friend Missy, who happens to be the Disability Ministry Director at Highlands Church, always asks in her volunteer trainings, what's more harmful? A typically able person making the presumption that a person with a disability can understand everything said to and happening around them when they really can't? Or someone noticing another person's disability and jumping to conclusion that their physical limitations automatically makes them not cognitively aware? Giving people the benefit of the doubt is always the best practice. We are all created in God's image. He has given each of us specific gifts for a dedicated purpose, regardless of disability, as it states in 1 Peter 4:10-11, and that makes us all worthy of human dignity and meaningful communication. Throughout the history of humanity, there has always been one dominant form of communication by which we interact, and that is telling stories. We all do it, every day, several times a day. Everyone at any age, and any condition or circumstance can appreciate a good story. The challenge of finding common ground starts with dispelling another's misguided assumptions. To do this, we must work to let others see our individual characters at all times. Each person's story is different, and so are the ways it can be told. I share my own stories in many various forms, each one as intensely personal as the next. For example, I'm able to connect with those that watch me dance or do Pilates by explaining that while I have to rely on my power chair for my general mobility, I still enjoy being physically active and pushing the limits of my body. Similarly, anyone who reads my written work will quickly realize I have many of the same thought processes, emotions, desires and goals as any other 30-something able-bodied woman, even though my speech may be difficult to understand. With this in mind, I'm going to give you a couple pieces of advice as future teachers. 1. There is only one assumption that you should ever make about your students, and that is always assume competence. If they do have some type of cognitive disability, you can figure out how to accommodate for it as you get to know them. If you have a student with a disability who is mainstreamed in a regular classroom, like I was, make an effort to give them opportunities to demonstrate that in many ways, they are just like their typically able classmates. 2. No matter how severe a student's disability might be, that doesn't mean you can't still have high expectations for them. You never know what God is calling them to do. Remember, I am an author. Joni Eareckson Tada runs what is most likely the largest international disability ministry, and there are a dozen other examples. I created a worksheet that's in your folders so you can gather and discuss your ideas about always assuming competence. Now, I'd love to answer any questions you have. My lovely cousin Michaela is here to help clarify my speech. Thanks so much for having me today. And before you leave class, feel free to check out the goodies I brought with me. I now have 3 current books which are available for purchase if you're interested. I'm offering a student discount which you can see on your book flyer. I also have a few Always Assume Competence shirts, trinkets, and story journals to go along with the workbook for sale. If you're interested in participating in one of my workshops, I'm happy to come lead one on campus for you or even on Zoom. The workshop brochures are up here. Does anyone have questions? Please don't be shy.
All right. Thank you so much. Can we give her some thanks?